The morning sun was just peeking through the dense Montana forest as Tom, a wildlife photographer with 20 years of experience, shouldered his heavy camera bag. He had been tracking a herd of elk for his new documentary series, following their early spring migration patterns through the rugged terrain. The crisp mountain air filled his lungs as he carefully made his way through the underbrush, his weathered boots barely making a sound on the damp forest floor. The light was perfect for photography. That golden hour when everything seems to glow with an almost magical quality. Tom had just set up his tripod near a small clearing when an unusual sound caught his attention. At first, he thought it might be a bird call he wasn't familiar with, but something about it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. 20 years in the wilderness had taught him to trust his instincts. The sound came again, a high-pitched whimper that definitely wasn't a bird. It was filled with something that made his heart skip a beat: desperation. Tom carefully packed his camera gear, knowing that whatever was making that sound needed to be approached with caution. As he moved toward the noise, the whimpering grew louder, more insistent. Through a gap in the trees, he caught his first glimpse of something that made him freeze in his tracks. A small black bear cub, probably no more than a few months old, was pacing back and forth near the edge of what looked like a steep drop-off. Tom's first instinct was to back away slowly. Everyone knows that where there's a bear cub, a protective mother is usually close by. But something was off about this situation. The cub's behavior was unlike anything Tom had ever seen in all his years photographing wildlife. Instead of running away when it spotted him, the little bear actually turned to look right at him. Its dark eyes were filled with what could only be described as panic. The cub made that whimpering sound again, and this time Tom could see its whole body trembling. He should have left. Every wildlife safety training he'd ever had told him to walk away from this situation. But when the cub took a few steps toward him, then looked back at the ravine, then back at him again, Tom knew something was terribly wrong. The little bear was trying to communicate with him. "Hey there, little one," Tom said softly, keeping his voice calm and steady. "What's got you so upset?" As if understanding his words, the cub made another distressed sound and moved closer to the edge of the ravine. Tom's heart was pounding now. He knew he was about to do something that went against every rule in the book, but he couldn't ignore this cry for help. With slow, careful movements, he edged closer to where the cub was standing. The little bear watched his approach, making small, urgent sounds that seemed to say, "Hurry up." When Tom was about 20 feet away, the cub did something extraordinary. It stood on its hind legs, let out a loud cry, then dropped back down and pointed its nose toward the ravine edge. Tom's hands were shaking as he pulled out his binoculars. As he peered over the edge of the drop-off, his breath caught in his throat. There, about 20 feet below, lay a full-grown female black bear. She was conscious but clearly injured, trapped in the narrow space between the steep walls of the ravine. Looking at the disturbed earth and broken branches, Tom could piece together what had happened. She must have lost her footing in the dark and fallen. The mother bear's eyes met his, and in that moment, Tom saw something that would stay with him forever. Not the fierce defiance he expected from a wild animal, but a quiet desperation that matched her cub's cries. She tried to move but couldn't seem to get any traction on the steep walls. The cub made another plaintive sound, and Tom looked back at the little bear. Those eyes seemed to be begging him for help. In all his years of wildlife photography, he documented countless amazing moments, but this was different. This wasn't just about capturing images anymore. This was about life and death. As Tom pulled out his phone to call for help, the cub sat down next to him, much closer than any wild bear should ever be to a human. The trust this little creature was placing in him was extraordinary, and Tom knew right then that this was going to be one of the most important days of his life. Tom's phone showed only one bar of signal in this remote part of the forest. His hands were trembling slightly as he dialed the Wildlife Services emergency number, all while the bear cub sat nearby, watching his every move with those soulful brown eyes. The call finally connected, but the news wasn't good. Due to several other emergency situations and the remote location, the nearest rescue team couldn't reach them for at least 24 hours. As he ended the call, Tom looked down at the mother bear again. She was lying on her side, breathing heavily, her dark fur matted with dirt from her fall. The ravine walls were almost vertical, made of loose soil and scattered rocks. No wonder she couldn't climb out on her own. The more he studied the situation, the more he realized that waiting wasn't an option. The mother bear might be more seriously injured than she appeared, and the young cub had probably been without milk for at least a day. The cub moved closer to the edge of the ravine, making soft whimpering sounds to its mother. The mother bear responded with a gentle grunt, as if trying to reassure her baby that everything would be okay. Tom felt his throat tighten with emotion. He'd never seen such a clear display of love and concern between wild animals before. "Okay, little one," he said softly, "I need to get back to my truck. I think I have some gear that might help." The cub turned to look at him, tilting its head as if understanding. Tom started walking backwards slowly, and to his amazement, the cub followed him, looking back occasionally at its mother but staying close to him. The walk back to his truck seemed to take forever, even though it was only about half a mile. Tom's mind was racing, trying to figure out how he could possibly help a full-grown black bear out of a ravine. He had some climbing gear in his truck. He always carried it for reaching difficult photo locations, but this would be pushing the equipment to its limits. When they reached the truck, Tom began pulling out everything he thought might help: ropes, carabiners, a fold-in shovel, and some thick blankets he kept for emergencies. The cub watched with intense interest as he gathered the supplies, occasionally standing on its hind legs to get a better look into the truck bed. "You're not like any bear I've ever met," Tom said, finding himself talking to the cub as if it were a person. The little bear made a soft sound in response, almost like a whine of impatience. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Tom couldn't help but smile. This tiny creature seemed to understand exactly what was happening. The walk back to the ravine was slower this time, with Tom carrying all the gear. The cub stayed right beside him, occasionally running ahead a few steps, then waiting for him to catch up, just like an anxious child. When they got back to the ravine, Tom set down his equipment and began to form a plan. He lay down carefully at the edge of the ravine to get a better look at the situation. The mother bear looked up at him, and he was struck again by how calm she seemed, almost as if she knew he was trying to help. She was injured, scared, and protecting her cub, yet something in her seemed to sense his good intentions. The walls of the ravine were about 20 feet high, with a slight slope that might work in their favor. Tom began setting up his rescue equipment, creating an anchor point by wrapping a rope around a thick tree trunk. He used every knot he'd learned in his years of climbing, checking and double-checking each one. One mistake could be disastrous. The cub stayed close by, watching everything with remarkable patience. Every few minutes, it would peer over the edge to check on its mother, making soft sounds that were answered by gentle grunts from below. The bond between them was incredible to witness. Here was a wild animal, putting its trust in a human because its mother's life depended on it. As Tom finished setting up the pulley system, he wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at his work. It wasn't pretty, but it might just be strong enough to help lift a bear. The real question was, how would he get the rope around the mother bear without getting himself killed? He'd need to partially climb down into the ravine. There was no other way. The cub seemed to sense his moment of doubt and did something extraordinary. It walked right up to Tom and placed one tiny paw on his boot, looking up at him with eyes that seemed to say, "Please help my mom." In that moment, Tom knew that no matter how dangerous this was going to be, he had to try. Some things in life are worth the risk, and saving this little family was definitely one of them. Tom took a deep breath as he double-checked his safety harness. The morning sun had climbed higher in the sky, and beams of light were now streaming through the trees, illuminating particles of dust and pollen in the air. He couldn't help but think about how different this day had turned out from his original plan of photographing elk. Now here he was, about to attempt something that most people would consider completely crazy. Before starting the rescue attempt, he decided to set up his camera on a tripod nearby. If nothing else, he wanted to document this incredible moment, though a small voice in his head reminded him that it might also help authorities figure out what happened if things went wrong. He pushed that thought away and focused on the task at hand. The bear cub had settled into a spot near the edge of the ravine, watching Tom's every move with those intelligent eyes. Every few minutes it would make soft cooing sounds, and its mother would respond from below with gentle grunts. It was as if they were reassuring each other that everything would be okay. "All right, little friend," Tom said softly, checking his rope one final time. "I'm going to help your mom now." But you need to stay right here, okay? The cub tilted its head, and Tom could have sworn it nodded slightly. He'd spent decades around wildlife, but he'd never seen anything like the behavior of this mother and cub. Tom began his careful descent into the ravine, using the rope system he'd created to lower himself down. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Everything he knew about bears told him this was dangerous. A cornered bear, especially one protecting its cub, could be deadly. But something about this situation felt different. The mother bear's eyes followed his movement, but there was no aggression in them, only what seemed like cautious hope. As he got closer to the mother bear, he could see her injuries better. She had some scrapes and bruises, but nothing appeared to be broken. She was just trapped in a spot where she couldn't get enough leverage to climb out. The walls of the ravine were too steep and crumbly for her claws to get a good grip. About halfway down, Tom paused to catch his breath and plan his next move. The mother bear was watching him intently, her breathing steady but rapid. Above, the cub made an encouraging sound, almost like a cheer. The whole scene felt surreal, like something out of a dream or a fairy tale. "Hey there, Mama," Tom said in his most soothing voice. "I know you're scared, but I'm here to help." He kept talking softly as he continued his descent, letting her get used to his voice. Years of wildlife photography had taught him that animals often respond to the tone of voice more than the words themselves. When he was about 6 feet away from the mother bear, she did something remarkable. She slowly shifted her position, turning slightly to give him better access to her side. It was as if she understood exactly what he was trying to do. Tom felt tears welling up in his eyes. This wild animal was choosing to trust him. The next few minutes were the most intense of Tom's life. With slow, careful movements, he managed to get close enough to begin wrapping the rescue rope around the mother bear's body. He used a special harness configuration he'd learned in his wilderness training, modified to work for a bear's unique shape. The whole time, he kept talking softly, explaining each move before he made it. The mother bear remained surprisingly still during this process, only flinching slightly when the rope first touched her fur. Above them, the cub kept making encouraging sounds, like a tiny cheerleader supporting both its mother and the strange human who was trying to help. "You're doing great, Mama," Tom murmured as he secured the final knot. "You're the bravest bear I've ever met." He looked up at the cub, who was peering down at them with obvious concern. "And you, little one, you're pretty amazing yourself." Just as Tom finished securing the rope system, a cloud passed over the sun, casting the ravine into shadow. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and for a moment, everything was perfectly still. Tom could hear his own heartbeat, the soft breathing of the mother bear, and the gentle rustling of leaves above. This was the moment of truth. The rope system was secure, but would it be strong enough to lift a full-grown black bear? Tom had modified his climbing gear to create a pulley system that would give him better leverage, but he'd never tested it with anything this heavy. As he prepared to climb back up, he said a silent prayer that his makeshift rescue plan would work. The mother bear seemed to sense that something important was about to happen. She looked directly into Tom's eyes, and in that moment, he felt a connection that transcended the natural barriers between humans and wild animals. They were no longer predator and prey, no longer two species that should fear each other. They were simply two living beings, one in need of help, and one willing to give it. Back at the top of the ravine, Tom wiped the sweat from his forehead and took a moment to catch his breath. His heart was still racing from the close encounter with the mother bear, but there was no time to rest. He needed to act quickly while everything was in place. The bear cub had moved closer to him, sitting just a few feet away, its eyes following his every movement as if studying and understanding each step of the rescue process. Tom walked to his truck, which he had managed to park about 50 feet from the ravine's edge. The cub followed him, padding along quietly like a faithful shadow. He started the engine and carefully backed the vehicle up until it was about 15 feet from the edge, positioning it so the rear bumper faced the ravine. Years of hauling photography equipment had taught him exactly what his truck could handle. "Okay, little one," Tom said to the cub, which was watching him with intense interest. "This is where things get serious." He attached the main rescue rope to his truck's tow hitch, creating an additional anchor point. The setup wasn't pretty, but it would give him the extra pulling power he needed. He had created a pulley system that would help multiply the force, a trick he'd learned during his wilderness training years ago. As he worked, dark clouds began gathering overhead. The weather was changing, and the wind was picking up, rustling through the trees. Tom knew he needed to hurry. A rainstorm would make everything more dangerous, especially with the loose soil around the ravine. The cub seemed to sense the urgency too, making small whimpering sounds as it looked up at the darkening sky. Tom checked his makeshift pulley system one final time. He'd used every bit of climbing gear he had, creating a network of ropes and carabiners that he hoped would be strong enough to lift a full-grown bear. The mother bear's weight would be distributed across multiple points, reducing the strain on any single rope. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best he could do with what he had. "Here goes nothing," Tom muttered, wiping his palms on his jeans. He started with a gentle pull on the rope system, testing how everything would work together. The ropes creaked and tightened, and far below, he heard the mother bear make a surprised sound. The cub immediately ran to the edge of the ravine, making soft, encouraging noises to its mother. Tom increased the tension gradually, using his full body weight to pull. The mother bear stayed remarkably calm, though he could hear her breathing getting heavier. The ropes stretched tight, and for a terrifying moment, Tom thought they might snap. But they held firm, and slowly, very slowly, he felt the weight begin to shift. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, making both Tom and the bear cub look up. The storm was getting closer. Tom redoubled his efforts, pulling with everything he had. Sweat ran down his face despite the cool air, and his muscles screamed in protest. The cub started pacing back and forth at the ravine's edge, making anxious little sounds. Suddenly, there was movement below. The mother bear had managed to get her front paws against the ravine wall, and she was trying to help, pushing with her legs, while the rope system took most of her weight. Tom's heart leaped. She was actively participating in her own rescue. The bear cub let out an excited sound, almost like a cheer. But then something went wrong. One of the secondary ropes caught on a jutting rock, causing the entire system to shift. The mother bear let out a frightened grunt, and Tom's heart nearly stopped. He quickly adjusted his position, trying to compensate for the unexpected change. The cub whimpered anxiously, and Tom wished he could reassure it that everything would be okay. "Hang on, Mama Bear," Tom called out, his voice strained with effort. "We're almost there." He wasn't sure if she could understand his words, but he hoped his tone would help keep her calm. The main rope creaked ominously, but held firm. Tom silently thanked whatever instinct had made him pack his heavy-duty climbing gear that morning. Another rumble of thunder, closer this time. A few drops of rain began to fall, making the rope slick and harder to grip. Tom knew it was now or never. He wrapped the main rope around his waist for better leverage and leaned back with all his might. The cub stood on its hind legs, watching intently as its mother's head finally appeared above the ravine's edge. The sight gave Tom a fresh surge of energy. Just a few more feet, and the mother bear would be able to scramble onto solid ground. He could see her powerful muscles straining as she tried to help, her claws digging into the earth at the ravine's edge. The cub was making excited little bouncing movements, unable to contain its enthusiasm as its mother got closer and closer to safety. The rain was falling steadily now, turning the forest floor slick and muddy. Tom's boots struggled to find grip as he pulled on the ropes with every ounce of strength he had left. The mother bear was almost at the top now, her huge form becoming more visible with each inch gained. The bear cub was beside itself with excitement, running back and forth along the edge of the ravine, occasionally standing on its hind legs to get a better view. A bright flash of lightning lit up the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The sudden noise startled everyone. Tom nearly lost his footing, the mother bear let out a frightened grunt, and the cub jumped backward with a startled yelp. The whole rescue operation hung in the balance for one heart-stopping moment. "Easy, easy," Tom called out, his voice hoarse with effort. "We're almost there." He wasn't sure who he was trying to reassure more, the bears or himself. The rain was coming down harder now, and he could feel the rope getting more slippery in his hands. He quickly wrapped it around his waist one more time, using his entire body as an anchor. The mother bear seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. Despite her exhaustion, she was doing her best to help, her powerful muscles straining as she tried to find purchase on the muddy ravine wall. Her claws dug into the soft earth, and Tom could see her determined expression as she fought to reach safety. The bear cub, watching its mother's struggle, did something extraordinary. It moved to the edge of the ravine, as close as it could safely get, and started making soft, encouraging sounds, almost like it was talking to its mother. The mother bear responded with a gentle grunt, and Tom could see her renewed effort to climb. Just then, another challenge presented itself. The rain had loosened the soil at the ravine's edge, and small chunks were beginning to break away. Tom's heart raced as he realized they were running out of time. If too much of the edge crumbled, the whole rescue attempt could fail catastrophically. "Come on, girl," Tom urged, gritting his teeth as he pulled harder. The muscles in his arms and back were on fire, but he couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. The mother bear's front paws were finally reaching the solid ground at the top of the ravine. Her cub was now just a few feet away from her, bouncing with anticipation. The next few moments seemed to happen in slow motion. As the mother bear made her final push to reach the top, a large section of the ravine's edge suddenly gave way. Tom's heart nearly stopped as he watched the earth crumble beneath her front paws. The bear cub let out a terrified cry, and the mother bear's eyes went wide with fear. But Tom was ready. In that split second, he threw his entire body backward, using his truck's anchor point for leverage. The rope system creaked and strained, but held firm. The mother bear's powerful instincts kicked in, and she lunged forward just as the ground beneath her collapsed. For one terrifying moment, she was suspended in midair, supported only by Tom's rope system. The bear cub watched in horror as its mother struggled, making distressed sounds that broke Tom's heart. But the little bear didn't run away. Instead, it moved even closer, as if trying to help. The mother bear, seeing her cub so near, found an extra surge of strength. With one massive effort, she pulled herself forward, her claws finally finding solid ground. Tom kept the tension on the ropes as the mother bear scrambled the final few feet to safety. Her fur was caked with mud, and she was breathing heavily, but she was alive. She collapsed on the solid ground, her sides heaving with exhaustion. The bear cub immediately ran to its mother, pressing its small body against her wet fur, making soft sounds of relief. The rain was still falling, but Tom barely noticed it anymore. He carefully released the tension in the ropes, his arms shaking from the effort. His clothes were soaked through, and mud covered him from head to toe, but none of that mattered. What he had just witnessed, the trust of these wild animals, the bond between mother and cub, the successful rescue against all odds, it was worth every aching muscle and every moment of fear. Thunder rumbled again in the distance, but it was moving away now. The mother bear was still lying on the ground, recovering her strength, while her cub nuzzled against her, checking every inch of its mother as if making sure she was really okay. Tom stayed where he was, giving them space while keeping a watchful eye on the situation. He knew the most critical moment was yet to come. What would a mother bear do, now that she was free and reunited with her cub? The rain began to ease, turning into a gentle drizzle that created a misty curtain in the forest. Tom stayed perfectly still, his breathing finally returning to normal as he watched the remarkable scene unfolding before him. The mother bear was slowly regaining her strength, her chest rising and falling more steadily now. Her cub hadn't left her side, continuing to nuzzle and comfort her with gentle touches and soft sounds. Tom's camera was still recording everything from its position on the tripod, though water droplets now covered the lens. He wanted to check the footage, but he didn't dare move yet. These first few moments after the rescue were crucial. Wild animals are often most dangerous when they're recovering from a traumatic experience. The mother bear shifted slightly, and Tom held his breath. She was massive, something he hadn't fully appreciated when she was down in the ravine. Her wet fur made her look even bigger, and despite her obvious exhaustion, he could see the powerful muscles rippling under her coat. One swipe from those claws could do serious damage, and Tom knew he needed to stay alert. But what happened next defied everything Tom knew about wild bear behavior. The mother bear slowly raised her head and looked directly at him. There was no aggression in her eyes, no sign of the fear or anger he would have expected. Instead, her gaze held something that made his throat tight with emotion, what looked remarkably like recognition and gratitude. The bear cub, sensing the change in its mother's attention, also turned to look at Tom. The little one had been so brave throughout the entire rescue, and now it sat beside its mother with what almost looked like pride. The cub made a soft chirping sound, similar to the one it had used to get Tom's attention in the first place. Slowly, very slowly, the mother bear began to rise to her feet. Tom's muscles tensed, ready to move if necessary, but somehow he knew he wouldn't need to. The bear's movements were careful and deliberate, as if she was making sure not to appear threatening. Her cub stayed close to her legs, bouncing slightly with excitement as its mother stood up. The forest around them had grown quiet, except for the gentle patter of raindrops on leaves. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath, watching this extraordinary moment between human and bears. A shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, creating a golden glow that seemed to spotlight the scene. Tom's camera caught everything. The mother bear standing at her full height, her fur glistening with rain, her cub pressed against her legs, and the incredible moment that followed. The mother bear took one step forward, then another, moving with surprising grace for such a large animal. She stopped about 15 feet from Tom, close enough that he could see every detail of her face. Then, in a gesture that would stay with Tom for the rest of his life, the mother bear lowered her head slightly and held his gaze for several long seconds. It wasn't a sign of submission, she was still very much a wild animal, but rather an acknowledgement, a way of communicating that transcended the usual barriers between species. The bear cub, apparently feeling that its mother's gesture wasn't quite enough, did something even more remarkable. It trotted a few steps closer to Tom, sat down, and lifted one paw in a motion that looked amazingly like a wave. Tom couldn't help but smile, despite his heart hammering in his chest. This little bear had shown such intelligence and trust throughout the entire rescue. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the fresh scent of rain-washed forest. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cleaned and renewed world. Sunlight sparkled on wet leaves and created rainbow prisms in the lingering raindrops. It was as if nature was celebrating the successful rescue. The mother bear made a soft grunting sound, and her cub immediately turned back to her. It was time for them to go. Tom watched as the pair began to move away, the mother bear's steps steady despite her ordeal. The cub bounced along beside her, occasionally looking back at Tom, as if making sure he was watching them leave. At the edge of the clearing, just before they disappeared into the deeper forest, the mother bear paused one final time. She turned her head to look back at Tom, and in that moment, he felt a connection that went beyond anything he had experienced in his 20 years of wildlife photography. This wasn't just a successful rescue, it was a reminder that sometimes the boundaries between wild and tame, between human and animal, aren't as fixed as we think they are. As Tom watched the bears disappear into the forest, he finally allowed himself to sink to the ground, his legs shaking from exhaustion and leftover adrenaline. The events of the past few hours felt almost dreamlike, but his aching muscles and muddy clothes were very real reminders of what had just happened. The forest was peaceful now, with birds beginning to sing again after the storm. He turned to look at his camera, still faithfully recording on its tripod. Walking over to check it, he felt a surge of relief when he saw that it had captured everything. The memory card held proof of this incredible encounter, something that even he might have trouble believing if he hadn't lived through it himself. Looking through the footage right there in the forest, Tom was struck by how clearly it showed the intelligence and emotion of both bears. The little cub's desperate attempts to get his attention, the mother's trust during the rescue, and that final meaningful exchange. It was all there, recorded in high definition. He knew this footage would change how people thought about wild animals and their capacity for understanding. The sun was now high in the sky, breaking through the remaining clouds and creating steam that rose from the wet forest floor. Tom began carefully packing up his equipment, his movements slow and deliberate as his muscles protested every motion. His clothes were caked with mud, and he was soaked to the bone, but he couldn't stop smiling. As he coiled the ropes and stored his gear, Tom's mind wandered to all the stories he'd heard over the years about connections between humans and wild animals. He'd always been a bit skeptical of such tales, preferring to see wildlife through the objective lens of his camera. But now he understood. Sometimes extraordinary things happen in nature that can't be easily explained. The drive back to the ranger station took longer than usual. Tom stopped several times along the way, partly to rest his tired body, but also to make notes about everything that had happened. He wanted to document every detail while it was still fresh in his mind. The weight of the memory card in his pocket felt like a precious treasure. When he finally reached the station, the rangers could hardly believe his story until he showed them the footage. The room fell silent as they watched the rescue unfold on his camera's small screen. Even the most experienced rangers, people who had worked with wild animals for decades, were amazed by what they saw. "In all my years working in these forests," one old ranger said, shaking his head in wonder, "I've never seen anything like this. That little cub knew exactly what it was doing when it came to find you." The rangers immediately organized a team to monitor the area, wanting to make sure the mother bear was recovering well from her ordeal. They were especially interested in watching for any unusual behavior that might indicate lasting effects from such close human contact. But their reports over the following weeks showed something remarkable. The mother and cub had returned to their natural patterns, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, though they seemed to be staying away from the ravine area. Tom's footage quickly caught the attention of wildlife researchers and conservationists. Experts from around the country contacted him, eager to study what they called an unprecedented example of interspecies cooperation in a crisis situation. The video showed something that many had theorized but few had ever documented, that animals, even wild ones, sometimes understand more than we give them credit for. Local schools began using the story in their nature education programs, teaching children about wildlife behavior and the importance of respecting wild animals. Tom was invited to give talks about his experience, always emphasizing that while the encounter was extraordinary, wild animals should still be treated with caution and respect. As the weeks passed, Tom often found himself returning to that area of the forest. He never got too close or tried to find the bears. He knew that would be wrong. But sometimes, while setting up his camera to photograph other wildlife, he would hear a distant sound that reminded him of the cub's cry or catch a glimpse of a black shape moving through the trees. One morning, about a month after the rescue, Tom was photographing birds near the ravine when he found something interesting: fresh bear tracks in the mud. There were two sets, one large, one small. They ran parallel to each other, clearly showing a mother and cub walking together. The tracks were a healthy distance from the ravine's edge, suggesting the bears had learned from their experience. Looking at those tracks, Tom felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The mother bear and her cub were out there somewhere, living their wild lives as nature intended. His camera had captured an amazing moment of connection between species, but the true gift had been the experience itself, a reminder that sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to witness something truly extraordinary in the natural world.